have three speakers, and we're starting off with Bob Marshall, who has probably 4 decades of experience in journalism. He started out as a sports reporter and then moved into environment writing and more investigative environment coverage. And I think also one thing that's really important, because for all of you who are working on multiple skills, because in today's journalism environment you have to be able to wear many hats. Bob started in the same, just like I think all 4 of us, we started in a world where we could just have one skill. But he successfully made the change from being a sports writer, and he was still doing reporting when he was writing about environment, but also now he then started doing photography, and what was it, a couple years ago, Edward Marrow Award, and so he's gone all the way into the multimedia world. And I guess he's a good example that you're never too old to learn new skills. So I guess Bob is going to talk, actually, this is what, part of what his talk is going to be about, is about how they covered environmental issues in Louisiana, but he's also going to talk about just some of the basics and the types of things that you need to function and be successful as a journalist in today's world, regardless where you are in the world. Bob?
Thank you.
You can stand.
This work?
That should
This work? Okay, good. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting us. Dennis has told me a lot about his students. Most of it is complimentary. I do have a message from the administration of Iowa State University. They wanted me to extend their appreciation to you for keeping him off their campus for the last year. No one missed Dennis in Iowa at all. Well, anyway, when Dennis did first ask me to talk, he was asking me to do this. We talked about doing this piece on what I like to talk about, 2 types of journalism, forensic and preventative. And forensic is usually, something terrible happens and journalists rush in and dig and find out why this happened. And then the other part of it would be, or the other type would be preventative, where we actually do the work ahead of time to warn our communities about what might happen. But then we started talking about who the audience was, and he said this was a group of aspiring young journalists and who were trying to find out where and how they could make a living in this crazily changing business of ours. And so we decided maybe this would be better, as editors like to say, to give you some news you could use, and that is how to find a job and keep a job in this changing journalism environment. As Dennis said, when I started out in the previous millennium, most cities had 1 or 2 newspapers, print papers. There might have been 1 or 2 broadcast stations, and those were your newsrooms, and that's where your news came from. And but that's changed, right? The internet came along and basically atomized the news business. So now each city might have dozens, if not scores, of news outlets, newsrooms large and small. And so how do you get into this now? How do you find a job? And what I've learned and discovered over this big change that's happened over the last 10 or 15 years is that the most important thing when I started is still the most important thing today that editors and publishers are looking for. And that is people who know how to ask questions, get information, get it quickly, get it accurately, and get it in and up. That's still the most important skill you have to selling yourself to a publisher, to a newsroom when you're starting out. And during my career, I'll give you an example. I started out as a sports writer. My first job actually out of college was covering the NFL, the National Football League. And then from there, I covered Super Bowls, Final Fours, World Cups, Olympics. I was on the road covering Olympics. I was sent to cover environmental stories. I did outdoor adventure travel, went all over the country and the world doing stories like that. I'm trying to think of everything I've done. I've been an opinion columnist. That's what I do today. I covered politics, science, engineering, religion, of course the environment. I even wrote about fashion at one time. I've been sent to interview Nobel Prize winning scientists, political leaders, royalty, astronauts, engineers. I've hosted regular national television and radio shows. I've written for national magazines. And I'd like to say that I did all that because I was one of the greatest writers in the world, or that I was as handsome as George Clooney and Robert Redford, but the truth is, that's not the case. Editors and publishers hired me and sent me to do these stories because they knew I could get the information, and I could get it accurately, and I could bring it to them to publish. And that's still, it's called reporting. That's what we do. When it gets right down to it, you're a news gatherer, an information gatherer. And you know, before you can, even if, that's not to say there isn't room for beautiful prose, for interpretive writing and descriptive writing, but even that is gathering facts, right? Before you can write that beautiful prose, you need the information. You need to know and record the color of the sky, the sound of the wind, the size and shape of the eyes of the person you're talking to, what they're wearing, anything else that paints a scene that can help your reporting jump off the page. So that's reporting too. And even with all the technical changes that have taken place in our business, that basic skill, that most important skill, hasn't changed. You might be using a smartphone, a camera, computer, maybe you're still using a pen and a pad, but you still are a reporter. And if you forget that, you won't get the story, and you won't have a job for very long. You won't even get that first job. You know, an odd thing that's happened with the internet, and you're much too young to remember this, but back in the 70s, even into the 80s, before really around 2000, when the internet really changed everything for good. You know, reporters, I kind of grew up in a kind of a golden age for reporters because it was very, very easy. I mean, I had all day or several days, depending if I was working on a large project, or a couple of weeks, maybe a month or two, but even on a daily basis, a beat reporter would go out, do their interviews, cover their meeting, sit down with their notes, craft their story, structure it right, give it to a story editor. They'd look at the story, maybe suggest some changes, a copy editor would go over it, a line editor would go over it. Then at the evening, at the end of the day, you'd put it all together, you'd hand it in, and the next morning you'd wake up, pick up the paper, kind of look at what you did, that was great, and you'd go on to the next thing. Rarely did you do more than one story a day. Sometimes maybe two, a story in a sidebar. It was true of television reporters too. They would do one story a day. But immediacy was never an issue or a demand for a reporter, a writer, a print story. Well, 20 years earlier, when most cities of any size had more than one newspaper, immediacy was important. There were several editions a day. And so you would rush out, cover something, and you wanted to get it out for the next edition. Well, that stopped in the 60s and 70s, and so from the mid-70s through the 80s into the 90s, kind of a golden age, a really nice time to be a print journalist, and even an electronic journalist. Well, oddly, this modernization of our business with the internet, the web, has actually turned the clock back about 50 years. Because now the business is 24/7. Whether you're working for what they call a legacy newsroom, say the New York Times, the Washington Post, or my old paper, the Times-Picayune, they want you to go out, get that information, and get it up quickly. They want the website to be constantly updated. So in a way, these old basic skills that were the most valued back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and 60s are also now those that are most valued by the people who run newsrooms, because they're working on this 24/7 cycle. And when you first start out, you might not have the time or be given the time to spend days, weeks, or even months on projects. So it doesn't matter how you're reporting or who you're working for today. It's going to be online, it's going to be on the web, and with almost no exceptions, the demands of making money on the web means more page views, which means freshening up that page constantly. So there's a push and a drive in newsrooms for people to constantly update, to post, to adjust. And so that means you have to keep doing that. So the same holds true, by the way. Dennis is a photojournalist. That's how he's made his mark in his career, one of the best we have. But even a photojournalist, people forget this sometimes, is a reporter first. That's what you're there for. You're not using a pen and a pad or a microphone necessarily. You're using a camera. And oftentimes a photojournalist is the first person on the scene of a story. And they're recording that, not just with their camera, they're taking notes. And when the reporter, the print reporter, shows up, oftentimes, at least in my career and still today, they have to go to some of the news that's unfolding, some of the scene is already over by the time they arrive there. So they depend on the photojournalist to give them that information and relay it. And a photojournalist, as I'm sure Dennis had told you, can have the most dramatic, most compelling picture in the world. But if you don't have the information for that cut line, for that caption, no one's going to use it. They might want to hang it on a wall at a museum or at an art gallery, but it's not going to be worth anything to that news organization if you haven't done the reporting. And that's really, once again, gets back to your first job, and that is getting information. So the number one rule, and I'm going to talk to first here today, is maybe Bob's rules for good reporting, is basically your most important skill is asking questions and getting information. And the greatest compliments you can get are when people say, you know, I really learned a lot about that next story. You know, that really explained things to you. In fact, you know, they have all these awards, but what I consider one of the greatest compliments I've ever gotten, I was doing, after Hurricane Katrina, which was a big storm that hit New Orleans about 10 years ago, in the levees that the federal government had built were improperly built, and they collapsed. At first we thought the storm had overwhelmed these levees and flood walls, but it turned out with some pretty aggressive reporting and in-depth forensic work by engineers that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers had actually designed and built these things improperly, below the standards of the day. They ignored changes in engineering standards and elevations. And so sometime after writing some of these stories, I got a call from a couple of professors at the University of North Carolina, engineering professors, and they're working on a textbook. And they asked me if they could lift a couple of paragraphs I wrote explaining what they call the failure mechanism of why these particular levees had collapsed. And I said, well, sure, you can use it. And then they asked me, where did I get my engineering degree from? And I told them, everything I know about engineering I learned in a reporting class. And to me, that was like the ultimate compliment, because these were professionals and they thought I knew enough about engineering to write this very clear explanation. And the only reason I had that information was that I had interviewed lots of engineers over and over again to get the information. So, what I want to do now maybe is talk to you a little bit about the most important things, maybe Bob's rules for good reporting. And how do I move it? Is there a remote? All right. Your most important skill is asking questions. I think I just went over that. That's what you do. People say, oh, you're an expert in whatever, football or backpacking or environment. I'm not an expert on anything. Everything I know, I learned from the people I interviewed. And that's really the most important skill you have. And I would always tell people, no, you're an expert on the coast, you're an expert on global warming. No, I'm not. And in fact, I often turn down invitations to speak on these issues because I'm just a reporter getting information from the experts. So that's one thing you need to write down and remember. That's your most important skill. Let's see if I got this going the right way. The second thing before you go into an interview, and I'm trying to give you some lessons maybe you can learn when you're applying for jobs, as you hopefully will be doing soon and getting employed. If you prepare for a story, you can cover anything, and I'm kind of a living example of that. As I said, the editors and publishers who sent me out to cover these various different things, really all over the world, it wasn't because they thought I was the most beautiful writer in the world. They knew that I could get the information. And how do you do that? Suppose you get a call from an editor and says, everyone's gone today, I want you to go out and do a story on, I don't know, the fashion show. You say, wait a minute, look at me. I'm not exactly a fashion plate. Well, you gotta go do it. You don't tell the editor no. So you sit down and do lots of research. And in this case, you do research by reading whatever you can, watching whatever you can. The internet's a great tool, but it's just part of the tool. You find out who the sources are, who are expert in this area, you contact them, you interview them, you get more information from them, and then you bring it all with you to the event. You have a questions list before you go to this interview, so you've done all your research, right? Maybe you know nothing about engineering, but you've contacted engineers before you go interview this other engineer, maybe professors at universities. Tell them what you're looking into, get as much information as you can. Research like crazy online, but also talk to real people who are experts. So you have a question list, but the important thing to remember, the question list is what you need to get from this story, okay? This is the information I've got to have. But you want that to be a guide, not a straitjacket. You don't want to limit the information you have. You don't want to ask a question and the person answers. What if they answer yes or no? You want to follow. You want to be like a miner, in a mine digging for gold. They may just follow that line of questioning until it runs dry. Every new piece of information they give you, you want to follow up on. I'll talk more about that later. Always bring a recorder with you. Most smartphones now have a recording device. You want to have that as backup for two reasons. First of all, you want to make sure you don't misquote anyone. And I deal in science a lot. And science reporting is like math. If you make a mistake in a word, it's like making a mistake in a number. And so you want to make sure you're accurate, but that should be the same type of accuracy you bring to any assignment. And oftentimes you don't have as much time as you want in an interview, so you want to have a record so you can go back and check it. You also want to protect yourself, especially when you're dealing with public officials. It's very easy for someone to say, I didn't say that, you misquoted me. In fact, when I was a sports writer, I was probably one of the first sports writers to use a little handheld tape recorder. And I always, in the locker room after a game, people say things and then they say, oh, that guy misquoted me. And I would just play it back and say, no, I had one guy say that the tape recorder misquoted me. But, so you want to make sure you have a record and you want to protect yourself. So bring a recorder. At the very beginning of your interview, you want to establish a follow-up. You want to get a time, a phone number, a date, when you get back in touch with this person in case you have any follow-up questions or in case your editor has any follow-up questions, and they probably will. And you want to let them know that they can get in touch with you if they have any follow-up information. Here's the most important thing, and it's hard for young people starting out in this business to do, and it's even hard for people who've been in it for a while. You have to leave your ego at home. You're not an expert in anything but asking questions. And so, it's not about you, it's about the reader and the editor. And that's because you're not an expert, there are no stupid questions. And you'll have situations where, I don't know what that meant, you're thinking, oh my God, I don't know what that word was, what are they talking about? And that's when you have to stop and ask, what does that mean? I do teach some courses. I teach at do some lectures at universities in New Orleans and at a program in Italy. And this is the hardest thing for people starting out to understand, is just to stop. Excuse me, what does that mean? I've been doing this for a long time, and I still interview scientists and other people, and I'll just say, what does that mean? Excuse me, hold it, explain that. And I remember as a sports writer, athletes love to intimidate people. They just look at your coaches in particular and like, oh, that's a dumb question. Okay, I'm dumb. Fine. Answer the question, please. Because it's not about you. And what will happen is you'll get back, you'll be writing your story, and there'll be an important quote or a phrase, and you'll say, what the hell does that mean? And you won't answer that in your story, and your editor will want to know. Or worse, you'll go to Wikipedia, and you'll get the wrong definition or explanation. And so your story will be absolutely wrong, and then you'll be in more trouble. So, please explain this. Could you do it again? Could you explain it slower this time? And maybe the explanation has words you don't know what they mean. You know, it's like speaking a different language. In science reporting, we're interpreters, and they're speaking one language, we're speaking another. And I've been interviewing Nobel laureates, and I've had to ask them over and over again, can you just go back and explain that? With the engineering story, I sat in a room with two of my colleagues and 3 professors in the Graduate School of Engineering at the University of California, Berkeley for 6 hours. Lots of donuts and coffee, and this big board, whiteboard, and they went over this stuff again and again until we finally had a grasp of it. It's another one you need to mark down. How do you spell that? And it sounds pretty simple, right? But when you misspell something, you don't do it on purpose, right? You do it out of ignorance. So if you get to a word that you're not sure of, or you never heard before, how do you spell that? I know these are such basic things, you're probably saying, what is this guy talking about? I need to know more important information. But I can tell you that if you don't know these things and follow these rules, it'll be hard for you to keep a job. When the Times-Picayune made a dramatic change, that's a daily paper in New Orleans about 5 years ago, and they went from a daily paper publishing and printing and delivering every day to 3 days a week, and they cut the staff in half. And they hired a lot of young people because they wanted to save money. They laid off a lot of really great reporters because they were making the top salary. And they hired a bunch of young people right out of school. And within about 6 months, half of those young people who were from journalism schools were out of work because they didn't know most of these rules. Their stories were full of errors. They were incomplete. And the editors were they just kept replacing these people until they found reporters who could get the basics down. Never leave an interview with a question unanswered. You know, it's kind of like the cardinal rule to me after the most important skill you have is asking questions. Remember when earlier I said you should go in with a list of questions. And that doesn't mean if someone says, I don't know, how did you come into this business? Well, I went to school and my father was, my father was a doctor too. I went to college in New York. I worked a while for the Peace Corps and then I came here. Well, there's a lot there, you know. Where'd you go to college in New York? Well, I went to, I don't know, Harvard Med School. What'd you do in the Peace Corps? Oh, well, I was in Kenya, Doctors Without Borders. What'd you do there? Well, you know, there was a civil war going on and I was in the front lines. And how was that experience? Well, you know, it was pretty awful. That's how I lost my leg. Really? How did you lose your leg? You have a false leg? Yeah, I lost this leg and a bomb exploded in the hospital and killed 30 people. This stuff happens all, so now you have a better story, right? You went there to do a story on someone who's a new doctor in town, maybe. This has happened to me numerous times. I was doing a story one time, adventure travel story, on Oregon Pipe Cactus National Monument in southern Arizona. This is a strict adventure travel, leisure type story. My wife was with me, we were camped out there, and I went to the ranger headquarters to talk to the rangers to get some background information. And as I'm walking up to the headquarters, there's a bronze plaque of a ranger. So I asked the PO, the public information guy I was with, I said, what is this? Oh, that's a young ranger. He was killed by drug runners in a shootout last year. So what do you mean a shootout? Here at the park? Yeah, we have a big problem. We have 300,000 illegals coming across the border every year through this park. Most of them are shepherded by what we call coyotes, people who they pay to bring them across the border. Most are just trying to get it to the States to make a better living, but a lot of them are drug runners. So really, it's just every night, every night, we coordinate with the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Border Patrol. We coordinate with satellites. We go out with night vision goggles, and we try to track these people down, and sometimes, you know, we're armed, and sometimes they are, and they're shootouts. So really, almost every night. In fact, when you're in the amphitheater watching movies, you might hear gunfire. That's what's going on. So I followed that line. So my story, which was going to be a simple travel leisure story, was a front page story on this incredible war going on in this beautiful national monument with all these people in their big SUVs sitting around watching outdoor theater, while on the other side of the screen, in the dark of night, there was this life and death struggle going on. Ran all over the country, much better story. Same thing with Katrina. I was doing a story. One of the stories I was just going to do a human interest story. These people who lived in front of one of the levees that breached me fell apart during the storm, and these homes were just wiped away. There was nothing left except like the outline, we call it chain wall, of where the house was. And I tracked these people down who had lived there. We went to their lot, and we were going to take some pictures, and I was talking to them about what life was like in this neighborhood before the storm. And they said it was pretty cool, we liked it, nothing wrong. No, you know, we loved living here, we had a big lawn. Sometimes the lawn would get wet. And I said, so are you really from what? From rain? They said, no, it would just be water on the lawn. So where was it coming from? And I said, well, we called the city, and they came out and tested the water, and said the water was coming from the canal behind our house. So really? So I talked to the engineers. They said, well, oh my God, the Corps of Engineers should have been alerted to that, because that meant the canal flood walls were improperly built, because when the water got high in this canal from rain, it was pressing down through the bottom of the canal and coming up on the protected side. And that eroded the protected side levee, which made it too weak to hold more water when the storm came. And that's why it collapsed. So instead of a story on what life had been like before disaster, we had a story that the city and the Corps of Engineers had missed an obvious sign that these levees had been poorly built. So you sit down to talk to someone about one story, never leave a story with a question unanswered, but never leave a line of questioning with a question in your mind. Because why is one of the most important questions you can ask. If you see little kids, or remember when you were a kid, you always ask your parents, why? And they'll say, because. Well, why is the why in a story, whether it's straight news, whether it's a feature, whether it's interpretive, is really what makes a story interesting. Important to answer those questions, the who, what, when, why, and where. But then the why. Why were you doing this? Why did you want to be a doctor? Why did you go to Kenya? Why do you have a wooden leg? So you never leave a question unanswered. You always mine each line of questioning till it's dry, till there's nothing there, and then you move on. How do you improve your craft? You know, you just write. You keep writing, and you have editing. It's like sports, really. It's muscle memory. In this case, it's intellectual, cognitive memory. You just keep doing it over and over again. And that brings us to this one. This is from sports as well. They say, what's the greatest ability? Availability. If a guy or a woman athlete's hurt, they can't play. It doesn't matter if they got the greatest leaping ability and speed. If they can't play, they're not worth much. And this means never turn down an assignment when you're starting out. I had a young man working for me, well, freelancing for me, in New Orleans at the Lens, the last place I worked until a few months ago, and I retired. But he had a lot of great reporter instincts, and he went to Tulane University, this private university in New Orleans that cost $50,000 a year. And what was his degree in, Marie? Do you remember? Tabachnik.
Oh, journalism. Well,
anyway, he had like a degree in English, but he was interested in journalism, and he liked environmental stuff, and he had interest, and he freelanced for me. I worked with him, and the editors worked with him. He said, I really want to be a journalist full time. And so he applied to the daily papers. And then one day, one of the daily papers, we have two again now, called me and said, what about this guy, Tabachnik? So, he's got the fire in his belly. He really wants to be a journalist. He's been doing some pretty good stuff for us. He's improving. You should interview him. They interviewed him. And they offered him a job on the crime beat in Baton Rouge, which is the capital of Louisiana, about 90 miles north of New Orleans. So I called him and said, Sam, I heard you got offered a job. Yeah, I turned it down. I said, you what? He said, I didn't want to live in Baton Rouge. I said, Sam, you might as well leave New Orleans, because no one is going to offer you another job. Because you just turned down a full-time job when they're hard to get. So my last lesson is, and especially if you're freelancing, don't turn down any assignment. Don't say, well, I really don't know much about fashion. Oh, I really don't like that. We want you to do a story on maybe, I don't know, maybe you're a liberal and they want you to do a story in this conservative movement, or you're conservative and they want you to do a story on some liberal politician. I don't like it. That's not your job. And you can't get better. You can't get hired if you keep saying no. And you can't get better if you don't keep practicing. People often say, how do you win awards? Well, you have to be in a good news town, you have to work at a good news organization, and you have to have good editors. And none of that happens if you keep saying, I don't want to do that. Pretty soon, what editors find out is a term in the business, it's old as a business. Do they have that fire in their belly? Do they really want to do this? So the best ability is availability, and everything else follows from that. And I think that's Dennis, you want to talk about some of this other stuff?
I think these projects would be really interesting for you to explain. And you should be able to get the web page should come up.
And there it is. Okay, so those are some of the basics about the reporting business, how to get a job, how to keep a job. And I'm going too fast. How do we go back? So Dennis wanted to talk about some of the multimedia projects we do now. He talked about how an old dinosaur like me could learn new skills, and it really isn't that hard, because once again, these are all things like, how do you use a smartphone? The purpose of the new technology is the same as it's always been, it's to get the information. And so at the Lens, which is a nonprofit newsroom, when I left the Times-Picayune, the daily newspaper, in 2013. They were making all these changes. I didn't like them. They asked me to stay, and I said, I'd rather do in-depth work. So I left and went to a newly formed nonprofit newsroom in New Orleans called The Lens that just does investigative in-depth reporting. I covered the coastal and environmental issues. In fact, we've hosted a group of journalists from Ukraine who work for nonprofits. They've been to New Orleans twice, and we've sent reporters here. In fact, we have 2 Lens staffers in Kiev right now on this exchange program. So what we do is we partnered with other nonprofits as well as some private newsrooms. ProPublica is the biggest in the States. They have lots of resources. They have many millions of dollars, and they have great graphics capabilities. So this was a story about what's happening in the southern part of my state. Basically, it's sinking, and it's falling apart, and it's being swallowed by the Gulf of Mexico.
Do you want us to click on certain links and we'll do that?
Click on Explore the Coast. So I did the writing and some of the photo research. Some of our other staffers did photo research. We did, and ProPublica did graphics. Go ahead and page down on this side. This is the copy. And hit on Explore Delacroix. So we did vignettes on specific areas, and what was happening, what these people had seen in these areas. And so, for example, if you go over here, and that's go to the Delacroix site and move up, and there should be. There's also audio if you click on here. This is a fellow who's lived there. He grew up speaking, this community spoke Spanish because it goes back to the 1700s. And if you click that, you might hear, we don't hear it hooked up. Okay, so we had different levels of reporting. We had audio, we had the words, and we also had the graphics. Go down to, on this side, there should be a photo collection of, maybe go back up to the original photo. There's a photo essay going back, maybe on that plus sign there. That had, this is where they live now, but this community was a subsistence community that goes back to 1780. Their community was a unique culture that basically spoke their own language, an old form of Spanish, because these people were moved to Louisiana by the Spanish king in the 1760s. And then the oil and gas industry came in and dredged canals. They originally lived on fishing and trapping and hunting. They never came to New Orleans. They couldn't get there. It was wetlands between New Orleans. This was only 25 miles away. And then, as the wetlands that provided a buffer from hurricanes and provided their livelihoods were destroyed by levees on the river, as well as oil and gas canals and extraction, their world fell apart in about 40 years. So these are old pictures from when this community had 2,500 people living there. And today, there's not much. Those are trappers with pelts from nutria and otter and mink. This is from the 1930s. You get that picture, Dennis, somewhere? And so we chose 10 different spots along the coast to show what's happened so rapidly in this area. They also have, the people at ProPublica did this great job of getting data from the U.S. Geological Survey and reconstructing the coast. And there are sliders you can take. Maybe if you go back, go back to the home page? Yeah, to the home page maybe. So this is maybe further back. Oh, hit on explore the coast. And click on Delacroix, it's going to be right up here. Right there. Okay, so if you go to, it's got to fill out. So this slider, okay, if you move it, I don't know if it's working. Anyway, it shows how this whole area just becomes open water. It doesn't seem to be working right now.
Maybe you're
It's slow. So anyway, we did that, and people asked me, how long did it take me to write the story? And I said, you know, actually it didn't take me more than a week to write the story because I've been reporting it for about 35 years. I know most of these people over the years. The shooters went out and took about 2 weeks, and our staff did photo research for about a month and a half or 2 months. And so that's the kind of things that we're trying to put together. And the second part of this was called Louisiana's Moonshot. Should be, there we go. So this second part of this series, the state has what they call a coastal master plan, in which they are hoping over 50 years and about $92 billion they can protect or save some of what's left. We've lost 2,000 square miles of our coast since the 1930s, just in Louisiana. And there's this race, and the title comes from a quote from an engineer who we asked him, what are the chances of getting this done? He said, it's going to take science like the moonshot. And the story says that this is actually even more ambitious than the United States moonshot, because President Kennedy set out a challenge, let's put a man on the moon and bring him back in 10 years. But if we didn't accomplish that, we'd still be around. In this case, if Louisiana isn't successful in this in 50 years, most of the state, with about 3 million people living there, will be open water before the end of the century, sometime between 2070 and 2090. So, and this goes, if you bring it up, you'll see, keep going. All right, so come down again. Go to explore the plan. So we did this shows every project that's planned, and you click on each one of these and it tells you what that project is and what it'll do. If you go back up, one possible future, click on that. And this will show you how dire the situation is. If everything works perfectly, the green will be rebuilt. We'll still lose everything that's red, and the gold is up in the air. So it's a pretty dramatic problem. It's probably the most critical environmental issue in the States, and obviously climate change and sea level rise plays a huge role. And it's all kind of layers to this story. This is a conservative state. They elect Republican congressmen who don't believe in climate change and who oppose all greenhouse gas regulations. So it's another story I did called Voting to Drown, in which the state keeps opposing the only thing that can really save, because the state's own scientists who do this plan have stated unequivocally that if emissions aren't controlled, most of this will be gone by 2100. So that's the kind of work we did there, and that's really what most, if you go online, New York Times, Washington Post, most of the newsrooms that are still surviving in the U.S. are doing this kind of work now, and they're adding video to it, using drones a lot and doing all kinds of neat stuff. And it's really kind of the best way to report these complicated stories. So this is kind of what we're talking about in preventive journalism. If you go to the other, there's another story here, Saving Louisiana's Coast, up at the top. If you scroll down on that, this is linking why the future of Louisiana's coast is directly tied to what happens in Antarctica. These graphics, which probably won't work here, but there was a key that shows the water rising. We'll get 6 feet of sea level rise by 2080 or 90 if emissions are not controlled because there'll be dramatic melting in Antarctica. And so that's, new report came out, so that's kind of preventive journalism, trying to explain to people what's going on. And then the last one here, this is the latest master plan in which the state's scientists said that even if this plan works perfectly, keep going up. Keep going. Keep going. Stop. Even if the plan works perfectly, and they get $92 billion, if emissions are not controlled, all in red is gone by 2065. So that's what we've been doing. That's preventive journalism. In other words, forensic would be coming in after it's all over and saying, oh my goodness, this is what happened. Why didn't you pay attention? And really, we kind of focused more on that after Katrina, when we realized the paper did a lot of soul searching and said, you know, if we had covered these issues, if we had covered how these levees and flood walls were being built, while they were being built, maybe this wouldn't have happened. And so, you know, we had to face up to the fact that we were partly responsible because by monopolizing news, being the only newspaper in the community, we had a responsibility to the community. And obviously, we had let them down. So, any questions on anything? Yes?
Thank you for the lecture, it was really interesting. My question is about Ukraine. Well, Ukraine is like a poor country and it's a country at war. And most of the journalists in here say that there is no place for environmental journalism in Ukraine until it gets like better. Do you think, is it the case, or how should we manage that?
I mean, I don't live in a country that's at war, so, you know, we have Trump. You know, if I lived to the sound of bombs and things and people dying, I might have a different perspective. But I would say that, you know, what kind of country will you live in when the war is over? When you say the war, I mean, there's always room for environmental reporting. Now, if an editor's telling you that, and that's what the editors want, then I would say, just like I told you, availability is visibility. I mean, that's the only type of work you can get in Ukraine, and that's what you have to do. But you know, I think there's a lot of interest in Ukraine, and I think people here, I don't see many people with earphones on, so there's a lot of English understood and spoken here. I would think you have a great advantage in that you could be writing for publications outside of Ukraine. If you can gather the facts in an editor at a Western publication, knows they can trust you, that you're accurate, and you can meet deadlines, then I think that certainly would be a market for your environmental reporting if no one wants to use it here. You know, like I said, I don't know what the editors of publications here are up against, but to me that's like saying we're not going to cover crime or the war. That's an important issue for quality of life, and in some cases for life, period. So, but as a young person starting out, take any assignment you can get to prove to editors that you can get the job done. That's what I would say. Yes?
I don't know if you can answer that question, but how do the Lens earn money?
Well, they don't. It's a nonprofit. Most of their, I'm saying I've left the Lens. National foundations give big grants. In my case, for my work, there was a $200,000 grant for 2 years. I didn't get all that money. You know, so that's how nonprofit newsrooms work. The grants came from Knight Foundation, believe it or not, the Walton Family Foundation. They run big grocery stores. There are all these philanthropic organizations that have different interests. And that's how nonprofits survive. We also had some local foundations award us money. The problem with local foundations is that they kind of want to be more hands-on, and as a newsroom, that doesn't work. So we lost a lot of our local foundation money because of our reporting being accurate and aggressive. But the national foundations, it's like any grant. You have production landmarks to meet, not the subject of your reporting. Well, the subject, environmental stories of which length, this length, how many often, how many meetings, town halls, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's all foundations. What nonprofits are doing more of now is partnerships. We partner with National Public Radio, with ProPublica, with some pay sites, with Slate, with the Weather Channel. I'm trying to remember some others in the East Coast and the West Coast. And that's how you survive. And there's more and more the role for nonprofits is expanding because they can do hardcore, in-depth journalism, which takes a lot of time, whereas newsrooms that are depending on web clicks to survive don't have the time to send two reporters or put in a team of reporters on a story for 2 months. They just can't do that anymore. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you once again for a great presentation. I've got 2 questions, if you allow.
Sure.
The first one is, let me just quote you, never leave with a question unanswered. So the question is, can you accept another question as an answer? That's the first one.
No, I mean, I don't, I just say that you just answered a question. No. And sometimes they'll say no comment, and you have to, they'll say you're badgering me. Well, you haven't answered the question. It depends on the person and the type of story. Politicians typically will do that and then they'll just walk away.
Yeah, and that leads to another question. Talking about asking questions, how do you know and how do you see that you asked enough? Because at some point, your interview or reporting might be treated as interrogation. So how do you...
Well, you want to make it,
yeah.
I like to try to take a conversational tone in all interviews, but I also consider all stories investigative. You're trying to get information. So you try to make it conversational. Always be polite. Thank you for meeting with me. God, you look great in that suit. Whatever, You just try to be pleasant and you pursue, but you never want to be put off. You want to control the interview one way or another. You want to get there. If you can get there before the interview, the day before, look at the area. You want to get there early. You want to be prepared and relaxed, and just keep mining away. Sometimes they say that's politicians can be different. And some subjects can be very difficult. And they'll just say that's not. What else do you need? Well, just once again, don't be intimidated or embarrassed. You're there representing the reader and the editor. And if you don't have the information, if there are holes in that story, you're going to have to go back and get them. And that's why you want this contact information. Different situations, if it's a very adversarial relationship, or worse, if you're in a pack of reporters, then it gets really difficult. And what I used to always do when I worked for an afternoon paper, I would let the pack exhaust itself. And then I would go ask my questions, if I could. So yeah. I mean, it takes a while to get used to. And when you're first doing it, you might be very self-conscious. It's kind of like, people who want to be photojournalists don't want to walk up into someone's face and take a picture. And when they first do it, they're very nervous. And you zoom with your feet, right, Dennis? You move in and out, and pretty soon you become a callous old guy like Dennis, and you don't care who you insult. And you got to get the story. So it takes a while to get used to, but judge the situation and, be politely firm and not letting this person go. A lot of times, I got 15 minutes. And okay, sure. I've actually gotten in cabs with people and driven out to the airport with them to finish my interviews. Waited in line with them at check-in, you know, so I could get the information I needed.
In this respect, I also have a question. When you done some prepared job, when you investigate something, how do you preserve some level of objectivity? Because when you investigate a topic before, you may have some certain opinion. How do you preserve your objectivity before you interview someone?
Well, I mean, that's a job you have to be very careful to do. You know, when you get all sides of a story, and you have editors as well who keep you in line. You know, there's a reason for a story to begin with. And then you might say, well, I'm going to pursue this angle. And typically you'll be working with an editor and they'll say, I want you to find out about this. Or if it's a feature, you know, like, as I said, you'll go in looking for a specific angle. And you have to be very careful not to have your opinion be insinuated into the story. So, and it's hard to do sometimes, but you know, you always want to have more than one source, obviously. And if someone says something, you know, about something or someone, you have to have another source and have another part of that story. But there's also this rule against false equivalency as well, which we could spend days talking about. But
What is false equivalency?
well, you know, the best example of that right now would be the whole issue, at least in the States, as an issue of global warming. And there's a lot of people say they don't believe in global warming. I mean, it's, so anyway, and so they insist that if you write a story, they want somewhere in the story, some people don't believe in this. Or they want you to quote someone who disagrees. Well, if 97% of the world's scientists say one thing and 3% say something else, then that's a false equivalency. They don't deserve that notice. It's like the Holocaust deniers. You know, every time you write a story about the Holocaust, you're not going to say, oh, some people disagree. So, you know, and once again, as a young person, your editor will definitely work you through this. And then sometimes as a reporter, you've got to look at the editor and say, hey, wait a minute. I know enough about this. This doesn't belong in the story. I've had to do that. I had to do that on maybe 6 years ago with an editor on one of these stories on the coast. And he said, you know, some people, Bob, there's a political, this is a controversial story. I said, it's not controversial. It's a political issue with some people. If you want to put that in there, these politicians disagree with 97% of the world's scientists. But, so you have to be careful with this whole false equivalency stuff. But keeping your opinion out can be hard. And that's really why I keep saying, work with an editor, work as often as you can, and read. The other thing you should do, and I didn't mention this, I always suggest that you make it a habit to read, you know, the websites of good publications on a daily basis. You know, spend an hour a day. If you're interested in feature writing, if you're interested in hard news or investigative writing, there's a lot of good stuff out there from good newsrooms. And, you know, there are formulas, believe it or not, to all types of stories. A lot of reporters hate to hear that, writers, that's not a formula. Well, they really are. And the more you read good feature writing, good news feature writing, good critical reviews, if you want to do movie reviews, the more you read that stuff, you'll understand how these things are structured. And it becomes, like I said, muscle memory. You know, sitcoms, if you watch sitcoms on TV, why are they so popular? I mean, I can sit down in most sitcoms. I don't watch a lot of them, but you can almost say the next line, right, in your favorite sitcom. You know the characters, you know what's going on. Why does that work? Because it's a successful formula. It's the same way with feature writing, news features. There's a formula that works, and the more you read, you'll understand that. It becomes second nature of how to organize your stories and how to put them together. Anything else?
Yeah, you told us that availability is the best ability, but I'm quite sure that you had some assignments that you haven't accepted. Can you tell us which ones and why?
Yeah, I'm probably the wrong person to ask that of. The only assignments I haven't accepted have been freelance assignments I didn't have time to do. I just wasn't interested in it, but it was extra. You know, it was like, I've really lived kind of a charmed life. I was pretty much my own boss for the last 35 years of my career. I kind of had, very luckily, had that kind of authority from my publishers. I'm trying to think, you know, but I was using the example of that young man who didn't want to go live in Baton Rouge. But I know I had a nephew, I have a nephew, who was a good writer and was interested in being a news reporter, an entertainment reporter, and a sports writer. And he was working as a stringer. And he would turn down assignments, and eventually they said, hey, you know, Bob, we can't use him, he's just not dependable. I can't think of any story. I mean, I was assigned to things like going to the Olympics for a month, or you know, unfortunately, I can't give you good examples of myself, but I know I saw that happening quite a bit. I would call people. I had a section for a while that I was in charge of, and I wanted a story written about a certain topic, and I would call these freelancers, and they would say, I don't want to do that. You know, then I'd just look for someone else. Okay, one more. I got to give this up here because we have two more speakers. Go ahead. We have time?
Yeah, sorry, one more short one.
Sure.
Which assignment you would not accept in Serbia?
Right now? Depends on the pay. Well, you know what? I was offered. One of the papers wanted me to come to work for them as a full-time environmental writer recently, and I don't want to work full-time. So I turned that down. I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't have the courage to be a frontline war reporter. Maybe I wouldn't do that. But, you know, I don't know what you're getting at. Maybe someone I didn't like or something I didn't like. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Well, I'd be attracted to those stories. I'd want to find out more about that person, that issue. I'd want to, especially if it was broadly disliked. I'm trying to think. Donald Trump, I think, would be a fascinating feature story if I could get access to him for a month. You know, Ebola would be really interesting to be, if someone could guarantee me I wouldn't get infected, it would be, things like that. I can't think of anything especially if I was in your situation, just starting out. I don't think I ever turned down an assignment, but like I said, I was very fortunate that I made my own assignments for a long time. Right?
Yeah. Oh, you talked about paper journalists, but what about live journalists? When we all remember.
Turn.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. You talked about paper journalists, but what about live journalists? We all remember the famous interview Kellen Conway Chuck News meets the press and about current facts. Where is the line that journalists can cross about talking that there's this fall on live TV on broadcast network?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
I'm sorry. When you take an interview on live TV,
Right.
and Kellen Conway says it's alternative facts. And we know this. And Chuck Todd said no, and there was about backlash about not talking that aggressive on live TV. Where's the line the journalists can cross?
You know, let's say somebody you're interviewing live.
They lie to you.
Yeah, but where's the line that journalists can cross?
Well, I think I've seen, not Mike, Chris Wallace, on Fox handled that very well. Someone said the crowds or whatever. He said, well, that's clearly not true. According to the photographs, that's not true. You're doing a live news interview. You're a reporter. So it's different for a print reporter. And the press in the States has been handling it, I think, pretty well. Originally, they had this big debate. This guy's lying. Is it a lie? What constitutes a lie? A lie has to mean you know the truth and you're deliberately not saying the truth. But how do we know he's deliberately not saying the truth? How do we know that his reality is different? So they went through this whole navel-gazing thing about how to treat it. Now they're just like, the president, once again, yes, they stated an obvious untruth or made a statement that's been proven to be inaccurate. You know, that's how they deal it. And in live TV, it's a little more difficult. But I've seen them handle it pretty well. Chris Wallace in particular said, well, whoever he was talking to, I forget about this specific interview, but Senator, that's been proven to be inaccurate or false. And the senator said, well, we think that's fake. And that's what he wants to say, then you're just quoting him. He's saying what happened was fake. So it's not an opinion. If it's clearly not accurate, then the reporter, it's tough because they, you know, look, politicians in particular use the media. And they give you, in this case, maybe 30 seconds, and they say, that's a lie. And then they walk off, and the reporter says, well, you just heard him, he said it was a lie, although it's been proven to be accurate over and over again. So, it's a tough spot. One more.
Hello. How do you convince people to do something in these environmental issues? Because this map, these old maps, is very shocking, but people can say, okay, but 2061, I will be dead. I'm sorry, it doesn't matter for me. How can you convince them to do something now?
Well, you know, that's not your job. You just present the news and the facts. It's pretty frustrating. I can tell you, working on this issue, reporting this issue for about 35 years, you know, I think everyone gets into this business. There's one reason most people become journalists. They kind of want to make the world a better place. You know, you think you want to do good to society. And I would encourage everyone to stay with this and get involved in this business because it's never been more important than it is now. So that gets frustrating, can wear you down. But there's a famous coach, football coach, American football coach called Bill Belichick. You know, American football is crazy games. 11 people for each team on the field at the same time. Every player's got to be doing different stuff. And he's famous for this line with his players, each player. Just do your job. Don't worry about the other players. Just do your job. And that's your job. That's a hell of a story. It's important for people to know this. You tell them. If they want to drown, well, you know, just be sure you move to Montana before that.
I have a good question. You mentioned that journalists have to leave his ego at home and accept like all the assignments from the editorial, but don't you think that at the same time the journalist will become kind of jack of all trades and master of none? Like, I mean, like my question is how to keep professionally in the field. If you, like said, like sports topics, environmental topics, like war topics, fashion topics, but like.
Well, when you're starting out, this is advice for anyone starting out or anyone looking for a job. And you do want to be, whatever it is, you know, a jack of all trades, a master of none. That's your job to get information. Now, if you want to specialize in something, fine. You're not going to get as much work starting out, probably, as if you'll take anything that comes your way. Then it's just like people who want to play music, right? Or want to be actors. Maybe they're waiting tables during the day. But eventually, you work on that craft. So writing is putting a story together, getting facts, organizing them, is the same from subject to subject. If you find an interest that really invigorates you, that's where your excitement, your interest is, you'll eventually be, as you establish a career as a reliable reporter, you'll be able to specialize in that. But rather than sit home and not do anything, not have your name anywhere, it's better to take every assignment to show that you can do this basic reporting, you're refining your craft, you let that editor know, I'm really interested in environment or music or whatever it is. And you'll start getting those assignments too. But the worst thing is to sit home and not work because you don't like that subject. Someone else will get the job. And it's really competitive now. In the US, like I said, there's probably more news sites now, I think, Dennis, than there were before the internet. They don't pay anything, or hardly anything, but you have to start somewhere and gradually establish a reputation, and then you can start picking things. And you may find out, I really don't like this. You might say, I spent all that time in school, and I really want to be a doctor or something. But you don't sit home and not work. It's like an athlete staying home. I want to be a goalie. No one's hiring goalies today. Well, I'm not going to play defenseman. You're not going to get hired. That's for beginners. Yes?
My question is about the preventive journalism. Do you know any examples of when the publication in media really prevents the disaster?
Yeah, we did work at the Times-Picayune. In fact, I was involved with some colleagues on some stories when they were building the new levees. When the nation was finally rebuilding these levees, they built poorly the first time. There was a whole section of levees that they were rebuilding poorly again. They were using bad soil. And the Corps didn't even know it, actually, at the time. So we pointed that out, and those levees would have been just as weak as the old levees. I think a lot of the reporting being done on global warming is slowly having an effect. States, coastal states, even if they're so-called red states, conservative states, and even if their congressional delegations are voting against climate legislation, the cities, the communities are taking action on their own. And that's helping. There's been lots of good environmental reporting. Going back to the 60s, Rachel Carson, and she wrote a book called Silent Spring that focused the nation's attention on the use of DDT, an insecticide, that was killing lots of birds and fish, but also killing people. And that was eventually almost banned completely. There are a lot of stories that have been done. I could probably just pick up a newspaper and go through it, but yeah, most of them work. People, the global warming thing has been really crazy in the U.S. It's because of our peculiar system of government there, and this whole conservative media thing. There's a whole generation in the U.S. that has grown up listening to one side of a story. And so there's kind of two different realities in the U.S. now on a lot of issues. And you can present the facts to these people, and they will deny the facts. They'll say that's not right. They'll say 1 and 1 is 2. And they'll say, no, it's 11. So, but there's a lot of good examples of preventive journalism.
I'm asking because I think could the developing of preventive journalism change the situation on the east of Ukraine now?
I'm not familiar enough with that to tell you. I know. I can't tell you. Maybe someone else here could. I just don't know enough about the situation. I just know a little bit about what we get in the Western press. So. All right. Well, thank you.